Hello, and welcome to Sir Astro's Painting. In this episode, I'll be painting the Gold Smoke Knight from Adam Poot's Kingdom Death Monster. The Gold Smoke Knight is a beautifully twisted and expressive figure, and is great for testing the limits of our metallic and non-metallic metal painting techniques. Here's a quick overview of the painting process. Assembly of the model was pretty straightforward, although I did end up with a few small gaps, which you can see me filling in with a little Mod Podge or matte varnish. After priming in black and providing some zenithal highlights, I'll be painting the base first to help establish the general atmosphere, as well as some of the lighting that might affect the figure. We can then paint the knight himself, where I'll be starting with the non-metallic areas, before moving on to the flames, and then the gold, where I adapted some of the colour ideas presented by Julio Cabos in Scalecolor's Minipedia, followed with a few final touches. As always, you'll find chapter links to the various parts of the model to help navigate the video. Let's begin with the base. I'm going to begin by giving the flames an undercoat of pure white, followed with some white dry brushing to sharpen the detail and textures on the stonework. We can use the direction of the brush strokes to help create a rough object source lighting value sketch as we do this. I'm now going to paint the flames, and you can use pretty much whatever yellow to orange tones you like for this. And for the smoky ends, I've chosen to use a mix of black leather and black, which I've partly chosen for the more matte finish. As you'd expect, I'm starting with the lightest tones for the base of the flames, then getting progressively darker and more orange towards the tips. I'm usually happy with a fairly quick and sketchy approach when it comes to painting fire, as it's a pretty chaotic thing in nature. I'm now painting the smoky tips, building up the opacity in a couple of layers. For the stony ground, I'm starting with a fairly thinned base coat of black mixed with Abyssal Blue, and I'll then be adding some highlights with the addition of an off-white such as Birch or White Sands, and I'll also be pushing the levels of blue using Caspian Blue for the areas not hit by the light of the flames. You can see I've thinned this enough to allow the underlying values and textures to show through, and I've gone especially thin for the areas closest to the flames. Notice I've covered the spots where the right foot's going with white tack for the time being. I'm going a lot darker and more heavy for the outside edge. I'm now adding some birch and beginning to pick out the highlights. I've chosen quite a bluish look both to create atmosphere and also to complement and offset the orange tones of the flames. I'm getting lighter and less saturated for these areas of object source lighting. This means I'll be able to add my orange tones on top in a moment without things turning green. I'm now adding the OSL tones, starting with some thin layers of orange. This allows me to build the intensity up in a few layers to my liking. For the areas that aren't being hit with the orange light, I'm now pushing the levels of blue. I'm also applying some more opaque touches of OSL for some of the more prominent details along the way. And here I'm just adding a couple of final touches to the flames. Let's now move on to the Gold Smoke Knight himself. I'm going to begin with the fur cloak, where I'm first once again sharpening up the textures with a quick white dry brush. To preserve the pattern of values, which I'm quite happy with, I'm using some skeleton Horde to provide the main tone for the fur. And for the shadows, I'll be using some Basilicanum Grey and Gryph-Charger Grey. I also like to have some contrast medium on hand in case I want to thin the tones on the fly. So this is the skeleton Horde, which I ended up thinning out a little. And here I'm placing some shadow tones. I'm now just brushing on some matte varnish to dull the slightly waxy finish of the contrast colour. I'll be adding a few highlights to the fur later on, but for now I'm going to paint the inside of the cloak using Petroleum Grey mixed with a little Thar Brown. I'm also sketching in a rough highlight with some additional Thar Brown. I'm using the same tones for the cloth at the front. I also use these colours for the paws of the lion for now, although I'll be doing some more work here later on. Next I'm painting the belt using burnt umber, highlighted up with yellow ochre and vanilla white. I pushed for quite a worn texture using some pretty bright tones, alternated with a thinned reapplication of the base tone. I'll be refining all of these areas a bit later on. Next, I'm painting the flames, just as we did for the base. Here I'm just adding a few little glowing particles or embers, simply with a dot of pure white, with some orange or yellow placed on top. I'm now painting the weapon staff in black, and I nearly missed the small flames on the face. Let's now paint the gold. For the non-metallic metal effect, I tried a few ideas out whilst working, but here's a summary of the approach I ended up with. I'm starting with a base tone of raw sienna mixed with spring green. I'll then be highlighting up with the addition of Inktense Yellow and white, along with a little Inktense Lime ink, which I find helps boost the luminosity in the brighter highlights. For the shadows, I played around with some green grey, which is actually quite bluish, to tie things in with the base, and some dark violet. I also found Inktense Brown to be a useful shadow tone, either used on its own or mixed with the green grey and violet. And finally, when thinned out, the Inktense Wood is great for bringing back some warmth and saturation to the midtones. So here I'm applying the raw sienna and spring green base tone, starting with just the lower half of the model. This might need a couple of layers. I'm now adding increasing amounts of the yellow and white to begin placing the highlights. I'm starting just on the right leg for now to check that I'm happy with my colour choices. Here you can see I'm incorporating a little of the Inktense Lime ink. And there's nothing wrong with returning to extend some of the midtones. Here I want to create the impression of light bouncing up from the knee onto the lower thigh. I'm now adding some touches of orange to show the fire being reflected in the armour. This can either be glazed on or mixed into the gold tone. Next I'm trying a mix of green grey and dark violet to deepen some of the shadows. also using this to add some dark lining, although I later moved more towards the Inktense Brown for this. And here I'm using some thinned Inktense Wood to blend the shadows to midtones and create some additional saturation and warmth. I'm now providing the base tone for the rest of the gold and proceeding to add the highlights and shadows. Here I'm just pushing the contrast on the belt a little further. And for the buckle and tiny studs, I'm using a bluish grayscale, using black, green grey and white. I was somewhat sketchy with the highlights for the weapon. This is once again the thinned Inktense Wood. I'm now mixing the belt highlight tone with some of the gold base tone, and using this to create a thin reflection of the belt on the lower part of the belly. And I'm now placing the main band of highlight on the torso. And here I imagine some of the gold on the lower half of the body being reflected up onto the belly just above the reflection of the belt. You can probably see how important the dark lining is. I also incorporated some environmental tones in the dark band of shadow on the body. And I ended up going really quite dark here to maximise the contrast. This is quite an expressive part of the figure, so I spent a fair bit of time here. You can see I'm once again including some touches of orange. I also included just one or two small scratches. I've now chosen to glue him to the base. And these are my last few touches for now, including just a spot of pure white for the brightest highlight on the torso. I'm now mixing a light peach tone, which I'm using to add a few coloured highlights to the fur cloak. And I'm going a little brighter for the highlight on the inner lining. I also thought that a slightly Caucasian skin tone for the paws or hands would be a little more creepy. This is just a little Reikland Fleshshade. And I'm now highlighting the claws using black to vanilla white. also doing a little refining of the cloth at the front. And here I'm incorporating a little of the purple cloth tone into the nearby reflection in the armour. I'm now just blending a couple of the transitions on the base, refining some of the flames, and adding some highlights to the staff. And finally, these are my last few refinements for the armour. And this completes the Gold Smoke Night. Thank you for joining me. I do hope you have enjoyed the episode. As always, you'll find full details of the products used in the video description, along with links to all of the places I can be found on social media and on Spotify. My sincerest thanks, as always, go to my kind patrons for funding this series. If you'd like to help support my work, do please consider hitting the Patreon link to find out more. Join me again soon as we continue painting miniatures from Kingdom Death Monster. Happy painting!